Hi, Tabitha. How are you?
Hi, Jocelyn. I'm good. How are you?
I'm amazing, and I'm so much better now that you're joining us for Confidence Conversations.
Oh, good. I'm glad it's better.
Yeah, so we're taping this on a Friday, so it is a very happy Friday, you guys, especially when I get to sit down and talk to a boss like Tabitha, who is the host of the Love Me Lab podcast and also a healer and a coach. So we're in for a real treat today.
Thanks. That was a great introduction.
Yeah. Well, you deserve it. So, Tab, I want to talk about your journey. People don't just decide to become life coaches overnight. And a
Mm.
lot of people still don't understand, like, what the heck is a life coach? So, I want to learn before we dive into all the amazing work that you're doing, how it is that you got to the point where you knew that this was your calling.
Mm. That's such an it's such a great way to it is like it's like a switch
Yeah.
almost. And it's one of those moments where it's like, oh, this keeps happening. This type of thing keeps happening. This type of
Hmm.
conversation. People are reaching out to me for things because we live our lives either out loud or not, right? And sometimes we don't even know how out loud we're living. And through decisions I've made in my life, the work I was putting out at the time I was writing, it just became, and not even that, people would come up to me randomly in a coffee shop or whatever before the pandemic and share their life with me and want advice and or just needing to process. And many people had said to me over the years, well, you should become a therapist. And
Hmm.
I thought about it, and I was already, my mid to late 30s at that point, and I was very interested in psychology. I liked holding space for people. I liked sitting with them, but it became this I had been in psychotherapy for many years, and while it was very helpful to me and I enjoyed it, it was also one of those things where I got to the point where I was like, I want to move forward more quickly. I want things I can do to make decisions to step forward into my life. And it wasn't that my therapist wasn't helping me do that. It was just that it was less focus on that and more focus on my history and my past and the wounds of my past, which was needed. So I think for me, the coaching aspect, getting into coaching and offering that to people was this like, I know I was in this place where I understood my past really
Right.
as much as I could. And I was feeling stuck in life and I needed tools to really move forward and heal at the same
Right.
time. So stepping forward and healing. So I really was gathering tools this whole time, to really be able to step into my healing, be present in my body, really observe my thoughts and feel my feelings while making decisions about my life moving forward. Because I was just feeling so stuck for a while,
Right.
if that makes sense. And so I really just started offering coaching because it was one of those things where people would come to me and be like, I'm having this situation, or just be processing their feelings about things and saying what's happening in their lives. And I'm not one to give advice necessarily, but I am one to ask the questions and make someone think
Hmm.
about what it is that they really want and how to make those decisions and to move forward while also still being present with themselves and going through the healing process, which I think we can totally do on our own, you know,
Hmm.
if we're given the tools. And so I think of my position as a coach as being able to help provide someone those tools as they're moving forward and just having that toolbox handy so that when they run into something where they're triggered or, they're just stuck in life and pull out those tools more readily and more easily because they have so many of them there because they've been able to gather them. And hopefully through someone like me, I've been able to hand them things that are easy to pick up in a moment, when it's hard
Yeah.
to think.
And I think that that's such an important point. I think a lot of times when we go through hard circumstances or life really gets the best of us at some point or another, it is so easy to get to a place where, or I won't even say this is easy because I was going to say it's easy to get to a place where you're okay with what's happened, but the place where you are at, right, where you come to terms with your past.
Mhm.
You'd understood what had happened. You know your triggers now and what's going on. But then it's like you're left almost feeling empty because
Mhm.
you've come to terms with what's gone on, what's happened. But now it's like, how do I move forward? How do I recognize what's gone on and then get to a place where I can not just come to terms with it, not just survive, but to thrive?
Mhm.
So that's why I love the work of coaching, and that's why I've done it myself. So it's really fun to hear that you share that.
Yeah.
I also find it so interesting that you said that people come up to you in coffee shops and random places to ask for that, because that's how you know. I think that a lot of coaches like kind of share that experience, right? People
Yeah.
know like that girl over there, that is the person. I definitely get that energy from you. So
Mm. Oh.
um yeah. So
It wasn't all in my head. I used to think I had a little sign right here that said,
yeah,
"Tell me everything."
I can help.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to hear about some of the stuff that you've had to go through and process to really get to be where you are, because this
Mm.
is hard work and you can't do it unless you have been there yourself. So I want to
Yeah.
hear about your journey.
Yeah, sure. I was born and raised in a family that was a minister's family. My father is an ordained minister. Um, my mother has a lot of narcissistic traits. She checks off many of the boxes of many of the different types of narcissists, actually. Um, and so I just was raised in a very narcissistic, religiously oppressive home. And a lot of spiritual abuse, financial abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, all of that, to the point where I was afraid to leave until the age of 30. And I I describe my leaving at 30 from my parents' home as escaping. It was like escaping a cult, basically. Um, and that was just a huge process for me to even get to that point where I felt like I could leave and accept the fact that I would probably be completely on my own in the world, be rejected, shunned, all of that. And all of that did happen. I did try to keep some level of contact with my family after that, but it was just, I was in this place where I had got into therapy right away after leaving their home. And I was putting up boundaries. I didn't realize at the time what that was, but I was building boundaries where I said, no, I'm not going to come. I'm not going to try to. My dad called me at one point and he's like, can you just fix whatever's going on between you and your mother? And I just said, that's not my job. And
Yeah.
I'm actually working through a lot of things right now. So that's not a good idea. And that was something I had to put down as this is I'm not going to go this far anymore. I'm not going to make
Right.
everything right like I have, in the past. And it's been a journey. It's been a lot of coming to terms with the fact that I was abused. It took me a few couple of years of dissonance to understand that that was actually abuse. And then the spirit, sorry about the beeping in the background if you can hear it. The spiritual abuse aspect, it was so, you know, tying your spirit to this type of abuse is so intense. If anyone's who's lived through spiritual abuse in the church or, in the family, it's your very soul, where you end up when you die is dependent upon making your abuser happy. And that's a very scary place to be. It's very manipulative and it's just extremely abusive. So, I would say I've been through a bit of a spiritual awakening as well as coming to terms with understanding the abuse that I went through and all the ways that that's affected my life and my decision making, getting into really terrible relationships, feeling like I need to fix everything, um, really not understanding who I am or where I belong in the world, and feeling really behind in life, for a very long time. So it's just
Yeah.
been a good 10-year. I'm 40 now. So I left at 30. It's just been a good long decade of really breaking everything down and building everything back up. And I've done that work and I'm still doing that work. And I don't think that work ever really ends, but I think it can get so much better. And
Hmm.
my life has gotten exponentially better since leaving my family of origin and working through all of this stuff myself. with
Yeah.
help along the way.
Yeah, I think it's amazing how transparent you are, because
Oh,
I just feel the healing that's coming to other people who resonate with that story. You know, we've discussed this before where we have similar backgrounds, right?
mm-hmm.
Um and for my situation it wasn't spiritual abuse, but I think that that's something that a lot of people suffer through, and it's the reason that a lot of people leave the church,
Mm-hmm.
because your very faith and who you are is tied to an identity which is made up, rather than it being the faith for what it is, and you know, the purity and the light that it is.
Yeah.
It's used as this tool in some cases, in some relationships, to have power over another, or it's used as this kind of like foundation for the narcissist to kind of take control and to take power. One thing outside of that,
Mm-hmm.
though, about your story that I think is so important for people to take a step back and kind of really hear, right, is the foundation is our core.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're raised in a home, right, where your foundation is off, whether it's the love or lack thereof that you receive from your parents, or just the things that you're told from a very young age, that's our foundation. And when we're children, we're like little sponges. We're just soaking up the information that we're received. And so when your kind of judgment of what's right or what's wrong, what's the truth, what's a lie, what's good and what's bad, like all of these things that we're learning, these life lessons that we're building our whole life and foundation off of,
Mm-hmm.
are skewed. It's like we don't even realize how it pours into our relationships and all of these other factors, how we make our decisions, how we feel like we have to, because you're raised in a hot and cold environment, how you feel like you have to be the people pleaser and do this and do that, because especially if it's a narcissistic environment, that's
Mm-hmm.
the only way that you're going to get attention from a narcissist. But Tabitha, what is a narcissist? Can you explain what that is?
A narcissist is essentially a child.
Yeah.
Someone who's just not developed any sense of self, someone who has come to rely on everyone else to kind of bolster them up. And whether they're doing that in an overt way, they're trying to get that in an overt way with control and manipulation, outward manipulation, and just what's the word? Using fear as a
Yeah.
tactic. Or, the more covert narcissist who's very, woe is me,
The
everyone feels
martyr.
sorry for me, the martyr, I'm not getting what I need in life, that kind of a thing. Um, Anytime a child needs to feel, or anyone around them feels like they need to bolster this person's whatever, whether it's because they're afraid and they're being coerced to out of fear, or feeling guilty because this person is doing so much for them or whatever. That's the kind of two ends of the spectrum, but it can be fall in between. When a parent makes everything about them, and everything has to kind of be about building up their reputation, or making them feel better, or telling them how great they are, whatever it is, that's really someone who just has no core self, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to really, I think it's hard to describe what a narcissist is. I think we've all
Yeah.
encountered those people. I think, um and ultimately a narcissist is not going to ever really realize that about themselves. And really, I think we all have these tendencies, right? So I've been through that thing too. Like, am I a narcissist? Because I have, at times I feel like I'm falling apart and I need somebody to kind of put me back together.
But
Or I
the
feel
thing
like
is, right, the narcissist never really asks that question.
they don't ask that question, and they don't acknowledge it, and they don't acknowledge that it's an issue normally. Unless, I mean, I've heard of some narcissists being in therapy and getting help for their issues, and maybe wanting to keep the things in their life that they have and learning ways to do that. I think that's them changing some habits in order to be able to keep the things that they have in their life. But really, they're described as people with with no empathy. Basically, they're not able to feel what other people are feeling. They don't really care. But they don't seem heartless. That's the other thing. They don't seem like heartless people. They can seem like really good, decent people who are doing amazing things in the world. And that's the confusing part, is
Yeah.
it gets almost like a double abuse, because that you're getting all of this stuff from the outside world of people telling you how great your parents are, how wonderful they are, when everyone in the home knows that it's a different story behind closed doors, kind of a thing. So
Mm-hmm.
if you it's like a dissonance that you have walking through life going, my parents are so great, but this isn't great, kind of a thing.
Right. And it's also the piece of where if it's not from the home, right, and it's not ingrained, there's the what they call the love bombing stage
Mhm.
and the mirroring. Narcissists are like the best at mirroring your behavior. And because
Yeah.
there is not that core of a true self, they're able to really adapt in any and every environment. But one thing that you'll notice is there's no consistency. It's just the kind of chameleon like behavior. So when you get in close confines with someone who is highly narcissistic or just has full blown NPD, um, you'll notice that you do love them so much and that you do have so much in common, and that it does feel really good in the beginning to be around this person because they are mirroring
Mhm.
you. And then the walls start to come down and you're left like you at age 30, where now you're doing the work to heal yourself, and 10 years have lapsed since then. But I want to know, because can I just take a step and say, if you hadn't told me you were 40, I would have thought you were like 26.
Oh,
And I don't say that to flatter you. You look good when you do the work to heal yourselves. So work on yourselves, guys, so you can look as good as Tabitha.
oh,
My goodness.
thank
I'm like, I need the skincare routine. I need all of it. But,
thank you.
when you're in that period of time to actually do the work on yourself,
Mhm.
one of the things, at least that I've found, is that you feel better, right? Especially when you find out, oh my gosh, there's a word for what I'm going through. It was narcissistic abuse. This is great. But
Mhm.
then you start to uncover the layers and the lies and really how the abuse kind of transpired. And I want to know about that period of time and what you recommend for people to do to get through it. Because what I found is that things get harder
Yeah.
before they get easier.
Yeah, totally. Um, I mean, it was this, like I said, it took a couple of years to actually accept what my therapist was telling me. I would relay circumstances or scenarios to him, and he would just be like, "You're being emotionally abused," or whatever. And I'd be like, "No, this is not abuse. It's just my mom's difficult."
Yeah, it's your
And
baseline.
yeah, yeah, that was. So once I realized it was abuse, he never used the word narcissist or anything like that, but I Googled how to deal with a difficult mother, and all of this stuff for narcissists came up, and narcissistic personality disorder and narcissistic people. And I was checking off boxes, and that was amazing. I was like, oh my gosh, there's an answer for this. This is why she does what she does. And it has nothing to do with me. And that was amazing. That felt really freeing. And then as I started breaking away more, I finally went no contact at the age of 35. So it took a good 5 years to really have full no contact. It was just this me living in a kind of like, well, maybe I can just have a superficial relationship with them. But they really still wanted, I say I think my father is very complicit in the abuse. And I think he also has narcissistic tendencies, not as overt as my mother's, but definitely they are a pair that works well together in this scenario. Um, so they still wanted really like full control over my life. I was married, I had stepchildren. They still wanted to have complete and total say in what I could and couldn't do in my life. And I just finally said enough, you know. So I had this major phone call with them and was trying to come to some sort of understanding or compromise, and it just wasn't happening. And so I hung up, and that was the very last time I talked. I mean, I hung up in the middle of a screaming match basically, and that was the last time I talked to my parents and my sister, who was also put on the phone at the same time, who's still living with them today. um so at that point I felt like I was on my own. I was in the middle of trying to figure out if I needed and wanted to stay in my marriage, It was a very draining relationship. It was something I didn't feel like was healthy for me. And so after going no contact, I left my husband at the time about 8 months later. And so I was just going through this really, I mean, you'll start to notice like things just don't sit right with you. You realize you can't change other people, and the only person you can change is yourself, and you can change your own circumstances, and that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of get up and go, and it takes sometimes just launching yourself out into the unknown completely. And this was my process for about 5 or 6 years, just really kind of sorting through what was happening, but also figuring out what was best for me. And I really did have to launch myself out of a family, launch myself out of a marriage. And then I found myself feeling free at first. And as some time went by, it was like 6 months to a year later, I started having a lot of anxiety and a lot of panic attacks just out of the blue. And that was where I really started grasping for tools. How do I make it through this life without feeling like I'm constantly dangling by a thread over the pit of hell, kind of a thing? Because that's what it felt like.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was where I really started. I mean, about 6 years into that, going to from leaving my family, you know, 5 or 6 years. So, really, in the last 3 or 4 years, I've really gathered a lot of tools to do that, to work
Mm-hmm.
through the anxiety, to mitigate the panic attacks. I don't have panic attacks so much anymore. Occasionally
Mm-hmm.
I will, but I know what to do at that point. And
Right.
it's really not one of these things like I'm not medicated. I'm not, you know, I really just kind of stay in the moment, and I'm able to do
Mm-hmm.
that with a lot of the things I've picked up over time. Is that the question you asked me?
It is. Yeah. No, that's great. And now I want to know, because you've come to a place where you haven't just done this for yourself, right? That's an amazing
Yeah.
feat on its own, because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people aren't able to pick themselves back up, even if you go no contact, which for those of you who are listening is really where it is how it sounds. You cut off contact and you are no longer accepting communication, and you're no longer expecting an apology or anything. You're not doing no contact, to be clear, is not to change your relationship with that person. It is to give yourself freedom from what has happened. So just want to be clear about the purpose of no contact. You're not going no contact to gain a sense of power and like, oh, I want this person to call, especially if you're dealing with a narcissist. It's not going to happen.
Right.
Um, but after you've done that for yourself, you've now transitioned to a place where you're helping other people heal.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear about how you're transforming lives.
I think the biggest way is providing a place to have resonance. You know, I tell my story. I use the podcast to help other people tell their stories. And I'm even having people reach out to me like, I think I would like to share my story and I'd like to do that on your podcast, kind of a thing. So in that way, it's healing for my guests. It's also healing for the people listening, because they can, when we hear story, we know we're not alone.
Right.
And when it resonates with us, we really know we're not alone. And it's not impossible. I think half the battle sometimes is feeling like something is impossible, or we're alone in doing it, or we're crazy. Like what we're going through, we're crazy, and we're not really going through it. And we live in such a dissonant state. And, that's part of it, is me sharing my story. And that's where it kind of started with the blogging, with an Instagram account that I had. And I met a really great core group of people on Instagram, interestingly enough, and we're all kind of in this healing space, and we all do it in different ways and
Yeah.
provide that in different ways. So I just decided to offer my services at that point. This is what I offer, because people have come to me and it's like, well, yeah, I could do this. And it's just not sustainable. Give it, when you're outpouring
Yeah.
all the time, that just isn't really sustainable. And I wish it were, I
Mm-hmm.
really wish it were. But in that sense, there's been a lot of growth in that area too, understanding my own worth, understanding, how life works and all of that stuff, money mindset and all of that. So it all ties in, because there's a lot of that stuff coming from a narcissistic home that just is, doesn't get developed well.
Yeah.
So
It's so interesting that you said it all ties together, because I think that when I started to do the work as well, you really do, the world kind of opens up in more ways than one. Like you talked about the Instagram community. That's how we met. We met through
yeah,
Instagram. I think I slid into your DMs.
you totally did.
It goes down in the DMs.
Yeah.
I but you find what you need when you let go of what no longer serves you. And so you're able to build these awesome little communities and able to do the work to actually help people and to help them heal. So I want to know, what are like 3 tips that you'd give someone who is struggling to get over narcissistic abuse, like after the point where they've identified this has happened to me,
Mm-hmm.
and they're sitting in that space just really trying to get out of feeling like woe is me. Because a lot of times the people who have gone through narcissistic abuse, they're not woe is me type of people, but there's a period of time where you just feel stuck or stagnant. What are 3 tips that you give for someone who's in that stage?
Ooh, 3 tips.
Yeah.
Put me on the spot, y'all. No, it's okay. I would start with getting really present with yourself. Find some way to get grounded, sit on the floor, close your eyes, that kind of thing. Get really, really present with yourself, because what's happening when we are going through these moments of I feel stuck, or, I'm never going to get better, or how does this even, how do I even move forward kind of a thing. When we can get really still and quiet and sit with our thoughts, like literally observe your thoughts, observe the stories that are playing in your head, because these are the stories that are going to keep repeating themselves until they have worked themselves out. And when we can sit with them and just really look at them and know, oh yeah, that's a thought, and not be the thing that we're thinking, right? We'll not
Mhm.
be the failure that we feel like we are, or not be the, this is impossible, and, not be in that. It's all very possible, and but we don't really listen to our thoughts. One thing I did when I was having panic attacks is I started I would do that. I would sit down and I would look at, like, internally, just look at the thoughts that were going through my mind, because panic attack will sneak up on you, like, out
Mhm.
of nowhere. And so seemingly out of nowhere. So what I found was when I would get really quiet, there were thoughts running in the background that were like telling me something, telling my body something. And I'd be like, oh, that's really interesting. So, I mean, curiosity, that's one, right? Getting really curious. Observe, observe your thoughts. Just observe them and realize they're not you. And then you can tell yourself a different story, right? You can start telling yourself the truth. You can say, what do I know at this point that is true? And move from that place. Move from that place of what is true. And so when we're thinking something's impossible, or we can't move, or we're never going to get over this, what is one thing that I can do right now? I can get up and take a shower, right? It can be that simple. Doing one little thing to tell yourself that you're capable, that you have power over your life, it will help you move to the next thing. And if that's the only thing you do in a day, like, that's cool, right?
That is an accomplishment, I think, to sit there and to really listen to your thoughts and opinions, because oftentimes we like to fill them with music and talking to other people and being busy in some type of way, watching TV, like whatever. But if you're able to do what you've just said and sit with your thought and listen to the dialogue that's going on in your brain,
Yeah.
you're able to really affect change. So that's good.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm like processing this as we're talking, right? I'm
Yeah,
going to go
yeah.
back, get curious, observe,
Mm-hmm.
and then do something. One little thing. If that's all you, I mean, I'm giving something in a very short, like, this is
Yeah,
like
yeah.
right now, this is what you can do kind of a thing, because sometimes that's just where we need to start.
Mhm. And that curiosity, right? That's the point. Because a lot of times we dismiss thoughts. We see
Yeah.
something like, oh, confidence classes, and we think, oh, I'm confident. And I had that. And that's one of the reasons why I named my community Cultivating Confidence Daily. It's because I was asked by a friend, um, when was the last time you felt like you weren't confident? And I was like, I don't know, like maybe like 5, 10 years ago. Like, and I honestly felt that. And then I had to take a step back and think, well, what is confidence? And what does that mean in all areas of life? And so when we're curious, we're able to really resolve things that we don't even know exist. And it starts with being able to ask yourself the question and ask why. Why do I think this way? Why do I feel this way? Why am I thinking this thought? Get curious about what's going on in your brain, and don't automatically dismiss a thought. Don't automatically dismiss, oh, I'm not feeling that way. If you felt it and something in your brain told you, let's stay here for a second, don't dismiss that. Let's dig into it a little bit. Let's see where we can go with this, because usually it's something that, because if we haven't dealt with it, if we're not dealing with it, we're dismissing it. So I see that as like, we're sitting on the grass and there's soil and we're just pushing it further down. We didn't do anything. And say we have a house that's built on this foundation. We've just built it further into our foundation. We haven't dug it up and got rid of it.
Right.
You're still sitting on that. So get curious, like Tabitha said.
Yeah, get really curious. And then in combination, just observe your thoughts and feel your feelings. Separate the two. Thought is a thought. It's not an actual fact. It's literally just a story playing in your mind. Your feelings are real. They're not always based on factual things, but they're real. So feel them. If you need to cry, if you need to scream, if you need to punch a pillow, like do it. You know, if you're angry, a lot of us are angry and we're so afraid to be angry because we were taught anger was bad, you know, and it's really okay. It's going to come out in other ways, and it does at times. And so observe your thoughts and feel your feelings. And then the next one would be to do something that empowers you, whether it's tiny, you know, get up and brush your teeth, or whether it's something big or feels big to you. But if we're not going to do the tiny things, it's going to be really hard to do the bigger things.
Yeah.
And if that's where you're starting at, and if that's where you need to start over multiple times or every day, that's okay. You know, but if we do these little things that make us feel empowered, we're going to be empowered to do the things that right now our brains are telling us feel really impossible to do. Whether that is going no contact with someone who's really toxic for us, or an entire family system, which feels really scary to our brains because our survival's tied to that, right? Our survival's tied to being in the tribe. That's why sticking in these toxic family systems feels like we're saving our own lives. At the same time, we're making ourselves really sick. And that's another thing. I had a lot of sickness and illness that went along with this abuse, and overcoming a lot of chronic illness. And I still have pain and all of that stuff, but it's much more manageable. It's much more manageable when you're able to feel your feelings and observe your thoughts and move through life and take it a step at a time.
Yeah. I want to stay there for a second on the chronic illness, because no, I think it's such an important point, because a lot of times we have things that come out of nowhere and we can't get rid of them, and we don't know, like, why am I feeling this way? And it just comes up. And guys, your body produces stress when you're in stressful situations, and that stress manifests itself in very different ways if you're not really releasing it in ways that Tabitha has recommended. And so it's not, you're not getting rid of it just because you're not acknowledging it. And so sometimes it does manifest itself in chronic pain and chronic illness. And so we have things that are going on that we don't even realize. And so I think that just paying attention to that and being able to recognize, like, if you're going through some of those things, maybe it is time to heal and be more present and just pay attention to what's going on in your body. One of the things that you talked about, though, was doing something about it. After we've gone through, we can make the choice every day to get up and brush our teeth. We can start the Love Me Lab podcast. We can watch a television show. We can get up, we can write a journal article. We can go take a class. There's so many things that we can do that seem small. The podcast isn't small, but there are things that we can do that seem small, like writing in our journal, right?
The podcast wouldn't have happened without all of those little things, though. I can tell you, the podcast was in my mind for 2 years, and it was one of these things that there was blockage around. There was
Mm-hmm.
blockage around being open and sharing my story and being out there. It's scary to people when they've been
Yeah.
through abuse. And that wouldn't have happened without those little steps taken multiple times for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And it can take that long, or it can be, you know, jumping in with both feet, you
Yeah.
know.
Everyone's process looks
Yeah.
different. But the fact that, and I love that you say like you will have to go through this a couple of times, and just know that it's okay to give yourself permission to do that.
Yeah.
So we've talked about quite a few things here. I want to know your take on forgiveness
Mm.
of the narcissist, because a lot of people I know feel like, oh no, you don't know what they've done to me. You haven't experienced this, and it's real. Like
Yeah.
like it is real. Like I want to say first and foremost, for anyone listening who resonates with any piece of this,
Mm.
I believe you. Your story is valid. The way that you feel is valid. And so before we talk about forgiveness and letting go, everything that you felt is valid. And we're not saying to allow people to abuse you, but forgiveness, what you'll find is it's a little different than we think about it in the usual context. So I want to get your thoughts on that, Tabitha.
Yeah, I was actually just talking about this with my boyfriend recently, and I was like, I don't think forgiveness is something that we should even have. I don't think forgiveness is something that we should put out in front of us as like, well, I'm not ready to forgive them yet, or I'm ready to forgive them now, kind of a
Mm-hmm.
thing. We shouldn't force ourselves to do that. I
Yeah.
don't even think forgiveness needs to be on the platter in front of us. That's what
Mm-hmm.
I think. I think we can't even get, I think it's something that would just happen without our forcing it or knowing that it's coming, kind of a
Yeah.
thing. Um,
Yeah.
I feel like forgiveness is too much shoved down people's throats, and we're told, well, it's for you, it's not for them, kind of a thing. And we see it as like almost a letting go of our own experience and our truth and
Mm.
having to give up a part of ourselves, right? I can honestly say I've forgiven my mother.
Yeah.
It wasn't one of these like, oh, I forgive you, mom, kind of
You
a thing.
released it.
I've released it. I've worked through it. And I don't have bitterness, you know. I feel like there's a difference between bitterness and being angry about things that you should be angry about. If we weren't angry about certain things, we'd never get out of really bad situations, you know. If we weren't afraid, truly afraid, we wouldn't get out of dangerous situations. And so I don't see forgiveness as this thing that is kind of out there and it's for the person to grab onto when they're ready, kind of a thing, and hand it to themselves or the other person. I just don't, I think it's just something that
Yeah.
happens. You know, I don't think it's, I wouldn't force it on anyone, and I
Yeah.
certainly wouldn't try to convince someone that they need to do it because it looks different for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think you'll know when you've forgiven that person. It's, they don't have the same hold over you that they once did. um you can still be angry about what happened and what they did, and hold forgiveness for them. Like, you can still understand where they came from, but also be like, I'm not going to have them in my life. And that might change. I'm not going to say
Yeah.
I'd never have my mother in my life, but I certainly would never have my mother in my life under the terms
Yeah.
by, you know, by which she laid down I needed to be in her life.
Yeah.
Like,
Like the capacity that you allow someone in your life is different, and the access that they have to you
yeah,
is different. And maybe you get there, maybe you never do. And it's something that you, a boundary, like we talked about boundaries earlier, it's a
yeah,
boundary that you place and you set for yourself. But I really love what you said about forgiveness, which is that it's not this cookie cutter, oh, it's not for you, it's for that, like it's not for them, it's for you. And it's true. And that's kind of like how I see it. But it's also like this thing where that is not, when you're in the place of working through it,
yeah,
that is the last thing you want to hear. And because I've been there, I'm like,
yeah,
you don't understand. It's like we cannot force forgiveness on ourselves or anyone. What we have to do is do the work on ourselves to be okay. And what you'll find is that when you're okay, you're really, really okay. And
yeah,
we have good days, we have bad days, right? Because we're human. But at some point you realize, oh my God, I've released this. And it's like, it's almost like one of those things where you look back and it just happened.
Yeah.
It's like oh my gosh, this, and sometimes it's more intentional. Like you do have to be intentional about like the process, right? You're intentional about change. You're intentional about letting things go, getting clear with your feelings, because we can't get over something that we don't acknowledge.
Yeah.
But we're intentional about releasing pain and accepting joy. And I think that that's something that's wonderful. So Tabitha, what does confidence mean to you?
Confidence mean to me? Confidence means to me doing something even when you're afraid to do it.
Yeah.
Because we all have fear. And I know there's a lot of talk out there about facing your fears and doing it afraid and all of that stuff. But that is what it is. Confidence isn't necessarily knowing that everything's going to turn out okay, or knowing that you're going to be able to be composed at all moments or whatever it is. It just doesn't happen. But I think the more we get really, really comfortable with ourselves, the more embodied we are, the more we can be in our bodies and feel our feelings and know that our thoughts are just thoughts and take control over the choices in our life. The more we can do that, the less we really care about what other people think or how we're coming across. And the more confident we are. It doesn't really, we're just showing up. We're showing up as our authentic selves. And so, long answer short. It's just showing up as your authentic self, really. And that takes a lot of work.
Yeah, it does it takes a lot of work to just show up as you are, because there's always this like natural inclination to want to fit in or to want to wait until things are comfortable. But you've been able to do it for yourself. You've helped others get to a place where they feel healed and happy. And I know that there's people listening who could definitely use your services or just the inspo that you have on your Instagram feed. So tell me, where do people find you?
Yeah, I'm definitely on Instagram more than anything right now, at Love Me Lab Podcast. It's all underscored after each word. So love underscore me underscore lab underscore podcast. Um, and then I have a website at lovemelab.com. That's where you can find all of the podcasts themselves. There's some blogging on there. There's like links to the coaching. Um, Everything, you can find everything there pretty much. And you can always DM me like you did.
Yeah, she's very open to DMs. I think she responded. Like, I don't want to put this precedent out there, but she responded very quickly when I slid in the DMs.
I'm already on there and you message me and I've got the time and I'll just I'm like, I don't care. I'm not going to do this like waiting game. I don't play games.
Yeah, that's great. You show up, girl. Tabitha shows up and she'll show up for you. So check her out at lovemelab.com and her page on the Love Me Lab podcast on Instagram, because she's here to spread inspiration, light, joy, and of course, healing and confidence. So thank you again for joining us for Confidence Conversations.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.